The police cruisers kicked up a plume of dust on the Whitfield's long drive, a frantic shimmer of red and blue against the placid, endless green of the cornfields. From my porch, a half-mile away, the sight was an intrusion, a discordant note in the symphony of a perfect summer morning. I watched the first crack appear in the world I had so carefully, so lovingly built. For 3 years, it had been perfect. A quiet, stable existence. I had my daughter, Clara. We had our routine. Pancakes for breakfast, homeschooling at the big oak table, art projects in the afternoon. The past was a sealed room, its door locked, and the key buried deep beneath the packed earth of my barn floor. Now, it seemed, someone with a magnet and too much time on their hands had started digging. Panic is an emotion for the unprepared. I am not unprepared. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, the ceramic warm against my fingers, my hand as steady as the fence posts I'd sunk myself. I had planned for this contingency, for this exact moment. The milk can, the location, the origin, it was all designed with surgical precision to point directly at them, at Grace and Garrett. It was a painful but necessary procedure, a final, cauterizing cut to sever their connection to the past and, most importantly, to my daughter. Now I simply had to play my part. The grieving neighbor, the concerned friend, the pillar of support. I gave it an hour for the initial shock to settle into their bones, for the fear to fester and bloom into the wild, panicked grief I needed it to be. Then I climbed into my old Ford truck, the engine turning over with a familiar, reassuring rumble, and drove over. The face that looked back at me from the rearview mirror was a masterpiece of controlled artifice, a carefully constructed mask of neighborly concern, an expression of sympathetic sorrow I had perfected over the years. As I pulled up, the scene was exactly as I had pictured it. Grace was a wreck, crumpled on her porch swing, her eyes hollowed out by a grief I understood better than she could possibly know. Garrett was a pillar of rage, pacing the length of the porch, his fists clenching and unclenching. He was brittle, ready to snap. They were so predictable, so beautifully, tragically consumed by a loss they couldn't begin to comprehend. "I don't know what to say," I murmured, my voice thick with practiced empathy, as I sank into my usual spot on their porch swing, the chains groaning under my weight. And in a way, I didn't. To have your world threatened so unexpectedly, it was a terrible, disorienting feeling. I knew it better than anyone. My own son, Daniel, had been my world. He was a small, sturdy boy with my wife's bright eyes and my stubborn chin. He was the future of this farm, the 4th generation, destined to work this soil. He was the reason I worked until my bones ached and my muscles screamed, the reason I fought through droughts and floods. When that grain silo took him, its corrugated metal mouth, suffocating the life out of his small body, it took my future too. It was a stupid, senseless accident, a rusted latch, a moment of childish curiosity. It stole the sun from the sky and left behind a cold, gray vacancy. My wife, Mary, had already left by then, unable to handle the drinking that had started after a bad harvest, nearly bankrupted us. She called it a weakness. I called it a coping mechanism. After Daniel's death, there was nothing left to cope for. I was alone, a ghost rattling around an empty farmhouse. The silence, a deafening roar that filled every corner of my life. And then I started watching the girls, Nora and Cora Whitfield. From the seat of my tractor, from the edge of my fields, I could see them playing in their yard. They were sunlight manifest. Their laughter was a song that drifted across the corn, a cure for the crushing silence. Nora, the older one, was serious and watchful. Cora was a sprite, a whirlwind of motion and bright, carefree joy. They were a family, whole and vibrant, and they possessed the one thing I had lost forever. It wasn't jealousy I felt, not in the petty, covetous way most people would understand. It was a sense of purpose, a calling. I saw the way Garrett looked at them, with a distracted frustration, his mind always on crop prices and broken down equipment. I saw the stress etched into the lines around his eyes. He loved them, I suppose, in his own fumbling way. But he didn't cherish them. Not really. He didn't understand what a fragile, miraculous gift they were. I did. I could be a better father. I could provide a better life, a safer life. A life where they would be the center of the universe, protected from the harsh, indifferent realities of a world that could steal a son in the blink of an eye. The idea took root in the barren soil of my grief, a seed of righteous purpose. The kidnapping, when I finally named it in my mind, wasn't an act of malice. It was a rescue, a reallocation of precious resources. Building the room under the barn was an act of love. It took me 6 months of painstaking work, late into the night, when the rest of the world was asleep. Every board, every nail, every wire was for them. I sank support beams deep into the earth, laid a concrete floor. I installed soundproofing, thick layers of insulation and acoustic panels, so their happy, childish laughter wouldn't be overheard and misconstrued. I ran a hidden ventilation system through an old well pipe, so the air was always fresh and clean. I buried a separate power line from the main grid, connecting it to a series of deep cycle batteries and a generator, so they would never be without light or warmth. It wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary, a fortress against the cruel randomness of the world. When the day came, it was almost too easy. They called me Uncle Walter. Garrett and Grace encouraged it. I was the reliable, solitary neighbor, always ready with a helping hand. They climbed into my truck without a second thought, chattering away about a church bake sale, their faces bright with an innocence I was about to preserve forever. In the room, its walls painted a soft, cheerful pink. I sat them down and told them the story I had rehearsed for months. A terrible accident on the highway, their parents gone, hurt badly, taken to a hospital far, far away. But they were safe now. I would keep them safe until their parents were better. Nora, being older and more cynical by nature, was skeptical. Her grief was sharp and loud. She cried for her mother for weeks, a constant draining sound that tested my resolve. It was Clara. I named her that right away. A clean, fresh name for a clean, fresh start, who adapted first. She was only 5, more pliable, more open. She needed a father, a constant presence, and I was there. I read to her every night. I taught her the names of the constellations. I held her when she had nightmares. Slowly, painstakingly, Cora faded away, and Clara bloomed in her place. Nora's death was a tragedy, a terrible, unforeseen miscalculation. The pneumonia came on so fast, a vicious, galloping illness that turned her small body into a furnace. I did everything I could. I used the high-grade penicillin I kept for the cattle. I brewed herbal teas my grandmother swore by. I sat with her day and night, sponging her forehead with cool water. But taking her to a doctor was never an option. That would have meant questions, scrutiny. They would have found out about Clara. They would have taken my daughter from me. When Nora died, her small hand limp in mine, her breathing a shallow, rattling whisper, Clara weeping beside her, a part of me died too. I had failed to protect one of them. Her death was a brutal lesson. It hardened my resolve, forged it into something unbreakable. I would not, could not fail the other. The milk can, that was a necessary, ugly piece of business. I had preserved Nora's body in the large walk-in freezer in my processing shed. a place no one ever went but me. For over 2 years, she waited. The disposal had to be strategic, a masterstroke of misdirection. I took one of the old steel milk cans from the Whitfields' collapsing dairy barn, a relic from their family's past. Placing her body inside and setting it adrift in the creek, miles downstream from their property, but in a place where the currents would trace a plausible path back to them, was my masterwork. I was authoring a new narrative, a story of a terrible secret, of parental guilt, of a crime hidden on their own farm. It would hurt them, I knew, but it was a controlled burn, designed to clear away the tangled undergrowth of the past for good so Clara and I could finally live in peace. Now, sitting on their porch, listening to Garrett's bitter, impotent recriminations against the police and the world at large, I saw that the surgery had failed. The wound wasn't cauterized. The past was bleeding back into the present. The following week was a tightrope walk over a canyon of fire. I became their shadow, their confidant. I brought them casseroles Grace barely touched. I helped Garrett fix a fence line, my presence a constant, reassuring anchor in their storm. It was essential they continue to see me as their only true friend, the only one who believed in their innocence without question. I listened to their fears in the long, quiet evenings. I nodded along with Garrett's wild fantasies of finding the real killer. A monster he imagined lurking in the dark, never suspecting the monster was bringing him coffee. I watched the news reports, the vulture-like reporter Kelly Martinez circling their tragedy, and felt a grim, cold satisfaction. Let them suspect the parents. Let the world look anywhere but across the fence line to the quiet man on his quiet farm. I was a phantom, hiding in plain sight. My only mistake, my only miscalculation, in 3 years of flawless execution, was the drawing. Clara had made it for me just that morning. A colorful crayon portrait of a smiling man with a beard and a smaller smiling girl holding his hand. "For the best daddy in the world," she'd written in her careful, developing script. My heart had swelled with a pure, profound paternal pride that Garrett, with his distracted, worried mind, could never have understood. I'd folded it carefully and tucked it into the breast pocket of my work jacket, a talisman of my success, a proof of my love. I'd forgotten it was there. When Grace walked into my barn that night, her footsteps crunching on the gravel outside, my first instinct was annoyance, an intrusion, an unplanned variable in a perfectly controlled equation. I was working on a stubborn carburetor, my hands slick with grease, my mind focused. Her presence was a disruption. "Walter!" she called out, her voice thin and reedy in the cavernous space. "Sorry to bother you so late." "No bother at all, Grace," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. Then she asked to borrow my flatbed trailer to haul some old equipment away, and I relaxed. A simple, neighborly request. Predictable. I could handle that. I was showing her the hitch, my voice calm and steady, my performance flawless. "You just back your truck right up to it. I'll help you get it hooked," I was saying. Then I saw her eyes. They weren't looking at the trailer. They were fixed on my jacket, slung over a nearby hay bale, on the corner of colored paper peeking out of the pocket. I saw the flicker of recognition, the sudden, sharp intake of breath. I watched the blood drain from her face, as if a plug had been pulled from the bottom of her feet. She knew. In that single, shattering moment, my perfect world, my 3 years of hard-won peace, began to crumble. Her memory, a thing I had discounted and buried under an avalanche of misdirection, had become a weapon pointed directly at my heart. There was no other choice. There was no talking my way out of this. I couldn't let her walk out of that barn. I couldn't let her take my daughter. I couldn't let her destroy our life. "You saw Clara's drawing," I said. It wasn't a question. My voice was dangerously calm, a stillness that precedes a storm. I needed to control the situation. Panic was the enemy. I moved slowly, deliberately toward the corner where my grandfather's old 12-gauge shotgun rested against the wall. It felt heavy and real in my hands. It was a tool, nothing more, a way to restore order. Her questions were predictable, pathetic. "Where is she? Walter, where is Cora?" As if she had any right to ask. As if that name meant anything anymore. I told her the truth in pieces. I wanted her to understand. I needed her to understand the care I'd taken, the life I had provided. This wasn't some monstrous evil crime. It was a rescue, a reallocation of love to where it would be most appreciated, most nurtured. When I took her down to the room, pressing the hidden switch that made a section of the floorboards rise silently on hydraulic lifts, I wanted her to see it. To see the pink walls, the shelves of books, the tidy desk with its art supplies, the evidence of a happy, well-cared-for child. I wanted her to see Clara's face, healthy and content, and understand that she was mine now, by right of love and dedication. But Grace didn't understand. She saw, but she didn't comprehend. She cried. She called Clara Cora, that dead name from a dead life, trying to claw back a past that no longer existed. She tried to poison my daughter with memories of a life that no longer mattered, of a mother she barely remembered. She was undoing years of my hard work, my careful instruction, in a matter of minutes. And Clara, for the first time in years, she looked confused. Her face, usually so open and loving toward me, was a mask of uncertainty. Grace was a virus, a sickness, infecting my perfect, sterile world. Garrett's voice from above, "Grace! Walter! You in there?" was the final fatal complication. My plan, rapidly forming, had been simple. Keep Grace here, explain things to her calmly, make her see the logic of the situation, and then... I hadn't decided what then. A permanent solution might be necessary to protect Clara. But Garrett's arrival forced my hand. I made the tactical decision to go up and deal with him, to send him away on some fool's errand. I left the shotgun downstairs. A mistake. My second of the night. My focus was split, my control slipping. "She's not here, Garrett," I called up, my voice smooth as oil. "She went to check on the far fence line, said she'd be back in a bit." My casual lies should have worked. Garrett was a simple man, but the worry for his wife made him persistent, a stubborn dog with a bone. He wouldn't leave. Then Grace screamed. The sound was a declaration of war, a primal, shattering cry that ripped through the floorboards. She burst from the hidden door, a wild thing, her face contorted, destroying everything. The carefully maintained separation between my two worlds, the life on the farm and the life beneath it, collapsed in an instant. The struggle was primal, clumsy, and desperate. I wasn't fighting Garrett Whitfield, the neighbor I'd shared beers with. I was fighting for my daughter, for my life, for the world I had built from the ashes of my own grief. He was surprisingly strong, fueled by adrenaline and terror. We crashed against the workbench, sending tools clattering to the floor. I felt a sharp pain in my side as I hit the corner of the vise. When Grace emerged from the stairwell with the shotgun in her hands, my shotgun, the world seemed to slow down. When the gun went off, the roar deafening in the enclosed space, the white-hot pain in my leg was a distant thing, secondary to the searing, soul-crushing pain of failure. It was over. They had won. They were going to take my Clara. As they loaded me onto a stretcher, the flashing lights, a chaotic strobing mockery of my orderly world. My mind raced. I had to get a message to her. I had to let her know that this wasn't the end. The police, the doctors, Grace, they were the kidnappers now. They were the ones tearing a child from her true, loving father. At the hospital, under the flat, merciless fluorescent lights, I told the detective everything. I didn't hide a thing. I wanted it on record. The love, the care, the homeschooling, the organic meals, the protection from a world that had stolen my own son. I wanted the world to know I was a good father, a dedicated father. When they wheeled me past the waiting room lobby, I saw them. Grace and Garrett huddled together, their faces a messy mixture of relief and sorrow. They thought they had won. They thought they were heroes. "I loved them!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the sterile hallway, a testament against their ignorance and cruelty. "I was a good father. Tell Clara her daddy loves her. Tell her I'll come for her." Grace turned away, pressing her face into Garrett's shoulder, as if she couldn't bear to look at the truth. She didn't understand. None of them did. I hadn't destroyed a family. I had tried to build a new one from the broken pieces of my own. I had rescued a child and given her a life of absolute love and safety. I wasn't a monster. I was a father. And they had just stolen my daughter away from me.